There have been so many stories about the political countdown and endless transition of the Babangida regime. As is well known, the date of the final handing over of power was shifted from 1990 to 1992 and then 1993. Now, let us look at the role Abacha played in this as a behind-the-scenes manipulator. Based in part on the report of the Political Bureau, which was originally set up in 1986, a two-party system was created in October 1989. They were the National Republican Convention (NRC) and the Social Democratic Party (SDP). Both parties were run and financed by the government, which also arrogated to itself the right to write their party constitutions. The constitutional context was the 1989 Constitution, or Decree No. 12 of 1989, based on work done by the Constitution Review Committee, ratified by the Constituent Assembly and amended by the Armed Forces Ruling Council. Among the 11 amendments imposed by the AFRC, 3 were defense and security related. One removed the National Assembly's control over national security because, according to the AFRC, it exposes the chief executives and the nation to clear impotence in the face of threat to security. The second deleted certain provisions establishing an Armed Forces Service Commission to supervise the implementation of the federal character principle. The third amendment removed Section 1, Subsection 4 of the draft constitution, which had outlawed coup and classified them as criminal. Initially, based on Decree No. 25 of 1987, amended by Decree No. 9 of 1989, there was a ban on all former politicians and top office holders since 1960, particularly those previously found guilty of abuse of office. However, both decrees were repealed in December 1991, initially under pressure from northern elders, but ultimately to create a level playing field for all ethnic groups. Similarly, based on Decree No. 19 of 1987 and amended by Decree No. 26 of 1989, the plan was for presidential elections in November 1992. However, as a result of alleged malpractices during party primaries in September 1992, primaries were cancelled altogether in October 1992. Major contenders were frozen out and the timetable was shifted to 1993. Local, state, and national committees of both parties were dissolved and replaced by caretaker committees. The Babangida government later announced that they would be audited. The driving principle behind all of this was Babangida's fear of powerful financially independent politicians and the secret desire to plant and pick controllable new breed politicians in state government houses and legislative positions all over the country as a civilian base for a diarchy which he would head at the center. Those who lost out in the cancellation of the 1992 presidential primaries and were banned included the retired Major General Shehu Yaradua, who won the SDP nomination hands down, and Chief Olufalaye. Alhajis Adamu Shiroma and Umaru Shinkafi were about to go in for a runoff for the NRC nomination. They too were banned. A few weeks later, on November 17, 1992, General Babangida dissolved the AFRC and, after a pregnant pause, created the National Defense and Security Council (NDSC) on January 2, 1993. A civilian transitional council was also set up to replace the Council of Ministers and win back waning public confidence in the transition program following the failed presidential primaries. Its chairman was Chief Enerst Shonekan, also known as Head of Government. Empowered by Decree No. 54 of 1992, the Transitional Council shared joint responsibility with the National Defense and Security Council to ensure a smooth and successful handover to civilians. It was after all of this that Alhaji Bashir Othman Tofa and Chief Moshood Kashimawo Olawale Abiola later emerged as the presidential contenders from the NRC and SDP respectively. All of this was being monitored by the security services as well as General Sani Abacha, who later told confidants that Babangida had been toying with the idea of ruling Nigeria for 30 years. When Chief Abiola first showed interest in running for the presidency, certain IBB boys, including Abacha, expressed concern and approached Babangida to find some way to ban Abiola from taking part. However, based on a security report which falsely projected Alhaji Babagana Kingibe as the likely winner of the SDP presidential primary convention in Jos, Babangida assured his concerned military boys that Abiola would not prevail, and thus there was no need for fear. On the other hand, he simultaneously assured Abiola that he could run for office if he so wished and would have no problems if he won fair and square. He did not tell Abiola, as far as is publicly known at that early stage, that there were restive northern officers opposed to his political ambitions, nor did he tell his caucus officers that he had given his word to Abiola that he could run for office. Interestingly, Abiola himself was independently familiar with most members of the Babangida military caucus, either as business associates or as a financial sponsor of previous coup in 1983 and 1985, in which they had played key roles. As things turned out, to the consternation of military officers like Abacha who were opposed to Chief Abiola, Abiola narrowly won the SDP nomination at the Jos Convention, overcoming determined opposition from a motley group of SDP governors and disgruntled former aspirants. However, security forces reported allegations of massive vote buying. Concerned officers approached Babangida to use the report as an excuse to ban Abiola and stop the process at that stage before it evolved to formal national elections. Meanwhile, as the June elections came nearer, against a backdrop of anti-military agitation by students and workers' groups, General Olusegun Obasanjo and Chief Anthony Enaoro publicly expressed doubts over the sincerity of the military's intention to leave power. Caught between an undercurrent of public suspicions that he had a hidden agenda and behind-the-scene pressure from some powerful elements of his military caucus to scuttle the transition again, Babangida initially resisted the military pressure. Alhaji Babagana Kingibe emerged after difficult negotiations as Abiola's running mate, while Dr. Sylvester Ugo was chosen as Tofa's vice presidential candidate. It must be mentioned, however, that the voice of the military was by no means uniform. There were officers like Lieutenant General Saliu Ibrahim, General Shola Williams, Brigadier MC Ali, Colonel Abubakar Umar, and a few others who genuinely wanted a disengagement of the military from politics. Some people claim Lieutenant General Oladipo Diya was also not in favor of the military perpetuating itself at this stage. Other officers preferred one candidate versus the other, while a small clique did not want to leave power for either candidate. This clique included Lieutenant General Joshua Dongoyaro, Brigadier David Mark, Brigadier Stephen Anthony Ukpo, Brigadier John Shagaya, Brigadier Alilu Akilu, and a few others, all of whom were IBB boys. What is really fascinating is how General Abacha concealed his real motives and intentions from most military officers. At the few senior officer conferences he attended, Abacha would typically remain quiet. He preferred to express his strong views to Babangida directly and privately, while quietly mobilizing opinion behind the scenes and maintaining discreet contact with civilian leaders of thought who were opposed to the elections in general and to Chief Abiola specifically. Meanwhile, to those unfamiliar with their inner tensions, he positioned himself as the guarantor of the Babangida regime. Major General MC Ali, for example, said that Abacha had the patience of a hook-line fisherman or a bush hunter and the memory of an elephant and a native cunning to match. In addition to this cacophony of discordant but troubling military voices, there were powerful civilian pressures, notably from the Sultan of Sokoto, Ibrahim Dasuki, as well as other emirs who allegedly did not like or trust either Tofa or Abiola. In the background, personalities who had been banned or skimped out from contesting as a result of government fiat were also opposed to the elections. These included retired Major General Shehu Yaradua and Alhaji Abubakar Rimi. Funny enough, Alhaji Bashir Tofa, who was the candidate, supported by some elements within the NRC, also joined the bandwagon to boycott and or cancel the elections. Then there were mischievous campaigners like the Association for Better Nigeria (ABN), which wanted the military to hold on to power. All these internal groups and persons working hard to scuttle the elections altogether were opposed by foreign countries like Britain and the US, which wanted the military to leave power. Nevertheless, on June 10, 1993, ignoring outer clauses in Decree No. 13 of 1993 and Decree No. 19 of 1987, Justice Basi Ikpeme of the Abuja High Court granted a motion brought by the ABN to restrain the Electoral Commission (NEC) from conducting the election. However, citing lack of jurisdictional authority, General Babangida initially chose to ignore the court, which was why the NEC went ahead to conduct the election on June 12, which was later said to be free and fair. On June 16, Professor Humphrey Nwosu announced, after results for 14 of the 30 states were already known, that the NEC would suspend announcing election results. The results increasingly pointed toward an apparent win by Chief Moshood Abiola, pending appeals to higher courts against lower courts' injunctions. The entire result was later released by a pressure group called the Campaign for Democracy (CD), suggesting that Abiola won the majority of votes in 19 states, while Tofa won 11 states. However, pressure from key army factions continued behind the scene. General Babangida left Abuja and went to Minna for urgent consultations with elements of his original 1985 military coup caucus. The majority of these elements, including Abacha, had become thoroughly fed up with his previous assurances that Abiola was not going to make it past the Jos Convention. They were now faced with the reality of an impending Abiola presidency. Practically holding Babangida hostage, they reportedly gave him the option to choose between annulling the elections or leaving the office voluntarily, short of which it is alleged he and Abiola might be killed. While all of this was going on, strange items of correspondence were circulating, alleging that if Moshood Abiola were to be allowed to take office, he would purge the military, move the capital back to Lagos, and take other actions deemed threatening to vested interests. Arguments were reportedly made in certain circles that Babangida was, by acts of benign neglect, about to destroy the legacy of the Sardauna of Sokoto and yield political and ultimately military power to an ethnic region that already dominated the country economically. This was amplified by interesting explanations that Abiola could not be controlled and that he was owed large sums of money by the federal government, which he would now unethically control, that he had many wives and concubines, and so on. Thrown into the mix were arguments about the controversial Jos Convention of the SDP, where he allegedly bought votes, and the basic unfairness of preventing those who won the party primaries in September 1992 from contesting. One school of thought felt that, in fairness, since Abiola had gone through the electoral process and spent large sums of money, he ought to be paid off for his expenses and then advised as a friend to avoid politics and stick to business. On June 21, 1993, Justice Dahiru Saleh of the Abuja High Court voided the election, even though the appeal by NEC was pending at the Court of Appeal. A formal announcement to the nation of the cancellation followed on June 23rd after a nocturnal military meeting that day before of IBB boys at the presidential villa. During the meeting, Most military officers rejected a negotiated compromise to resolve the impasse, preferring an all-out annulment. Shortly thereafter, a state of military alert was announced, and the Chief of Army Staff, Lieutenant General Saliu Ibrahim, went around army formations in the country to explain the annulment. According to Major General MC Ali, who was at that time Director of Military Intelligence (DMI), most soldiers were unhappy about the annulment for three reasons. First, they were fed up with the domination of a small clique of officers who had been in power since 1983. Second, in spite of General Babangida's settlements or material bribes, soldiers wanted to return to their professional roles. Third, many were upset about their deployment to Liberia to be killed like animals without national consensus or proper logistic support. But they had little choice as a result of command influence but to go along with it, at least on the surface. Meanwhile, according to Ali, security operatives were busy constructing overt and covert threats to the life of Chief MKO Abiola. Protests and riots erupted, especially in Lagos and other parts of Chief Abiola's home region of the country. In response, General Sani Abacha gave marching orders to the governor of Lagos State, Sir Michael Otedola, to restore order or risk exposing his citizens to the fury of the Nigerian army. Less than 24 hours later, soldiers of the Nigerian army poured into the streets of Lagos and shot hundreds of unarmed demonstrators indiscriminately on Abacha's orders. Meanwhile, the military became very unpopular, and officers even feared wearing their uniforms publicly. Following the annulment, General Obasanjo suggested that Babangida set up an interim presidential council comprising former heads of state, excluding Babangida, to negotiate the transition to a future permanent form of government. This plan would retain democratic structures at state and local levels, as well as the National Assembly at the national level, but the National Executive would be an interim government responsible to the Presidential Council. Babangida did not like the idea of a Presidential Council without him, but liked the notion of an interim national government as an exit strategy. A committee under Lieutenant General Joshua Dongoyaro meanwhile urged new elections under new rules, as Babangida had indicated in a speech to the nation on June 26. This proposed new presidential election was alleged to be conducted before August 27, 1993, even though the government statement dissolved the NEC, which would have been charged to conduct such an election. Babangida viewed this as a trap aimed at him and quietly maneuvered to slip out of it. Initially, the SDP predictably rejected any plans for a new election, and Abiola meanwhile refused to give up his mandate. However, after the usual Nigerian cajoling and bribing, political leaders of the SDP independently distanced themselves from Moshood Abiola, as well as governors and legislators originally elected on SDP tickets. The SDP, under Chief Tony Aneni and Alhaji Sule Lamido, then agreed on July 7, 1993 to an unelected interim national government in which they would collaborate with the NRC under Hamid Kusamotu and Tom Ikimi, as well as General Babangida, to the exclusion of Abiola, the apparent winner of the June 12 elections. Aneni's action caused a rift in the SDP that was later said to be resolved on October 11, well into the life of the interim national government. This development, which was the result of Babangida's personal initiative, left the head of state with the challenge of determining how he would tiptoe around his military shacks to guarantee his personal safety and exit from power, as well as provide military backing to the legitimacy of the interim national government. The only way he could have done this successfully was to assume full operational and policy control of the reins of the defense and security establishments, which meant he had to find a way to continue as commander-in-chief and Minister of Defense after August 27, 1993. Unfortunately, Babangida had dribbled his own military backers once too many and was unable to get support for such an arrangement from them. He did not trust them, they did not trust him, and neither did they trust themselves. It increasingly became clear that Babangida's personal political agenda and that of the Nigerian military officers who brought him to power in 1985 were divergent. To freeze Abiola out, the government released spate of decrees. These included, but were not limited to, Decree No. 39 of 1993, also known as Presidential Elections Repeal Decree; Decree No. 40, also known as Transition to Civil Rule; Decree No. 41, also known as Presidential Election, Invalidation of Court Order Decree. Media organizations like The Punch, Concord Press, Sketch, Abuja Newsday, Ogun State Broadcasting Corporation, and The Observer were proscribed. Then, a tripartite committee comprising military, government, and political parties representatives was set up on July 31, 1993 to determine how to manage what was left of the transition. The military was represented by Lieutenant General Joshua Dongoyaro and Lieutenant General Aliyu Guso, along with Brigadiers David Mark, John Shagaya, and Anthony Okpo. This configuration pointedly excluded most members of Abacha's Lagos group and provided some insights into Babangida's thinking and Abacha's cunning. Dongoyaro and the David Mark groups were neck-deep in the interim national government organizational intrigues, which Babangida half-heartedly hoped to manipulate in order to guarantee a military role for himself after August 27. Meanwhile, Abacha was quietly consolidating and networking within the military, probing for weaknesses and lining up his ducks in a row. But Abacha was crafty enough to allow some overlap. Brigadier David Mark, for example, was initially simultaneously in Abacha's Lagos group, as well as being in the IBB group. In this manner, a casual observer would superficially view the network of groups as one continuum of IBB Abacha boys, while Abacha quietly worked underground to crystallize his own clique. Abacha family believed in the concept of keeping one's enemies even closer to one than one's friends until he was ready to strike. The interim national government was represented by Chief Enerst Shonekan as head of state, Mr. Clement Akpambu as Minister of Justice, and Professor Jerry Ghana of the Ministry of Agriculture and Natural Resources, among others. The NRC was represented by Alhaji Adamu Shiroma, Alhaji Bashar Dalhatu, Mr. John Nwodo, Chief Tom Ikimi, and Mr. Eyo Ita. The SDP was represented by Mr. Patrick Dele Cole, Chief Jim Nwobodo, Alhaji Olushola Saraki, Chief Dakpo Sarumi, Mr. Joseph Toba, Alhaji Abubakar Rimi, and retired Major General Shehu Yaradua. In this confused situation, General MC Ali raised the possibility of overthrowing General Babangida with the Chief of Army Staff, Lieutenant General Saliu Ibrahim, who was reluctant to support such a move for a variety of professional, political, and practical reasons, including his deep distrust of General Abacha. Next, Ali approached the Minister of Defense, Sani Abacha, with the same idea. Abacha's main concern was whether the Chief of Army Staff, Saliu Ibrahim, would back such a move. Ali lied to Abacha by saying that he had not yet approached Saliu Ibrahim. Caught between two key officers who did not trust one another, Ali initially backed off. But as the situation further deteriorated and army prestige was at an all-time low, Ali again approached Abacha, this time at home, in the presence of Lieutenant General Jeremiah Uzeni. Again, Abacha chose to be obdurate, taciturn, and reflective. But Ali saw through him and concluded rightly that Abacha had some kind of personal design that he was not yet ready to spring, preferring General Babangida to leave the scene first, peacefully. Simultaneously, other dynamics may have been at play between Generals Babangida and Abacha. One unconfirmed account says that although they had a pact, their wives did not get along and that Mrs. Babangida did not relish the thought of her husband handing over to General Abacha. Meanwhile, other pro-IBB and anti-IBB military interest groups were scheming, including some core IBB boys who basically wanted to implement a self-succession plan after which professional officers in the military would be purged through a process of being set up and eliminated. There was also a last-ditch effort to get the National Assembly to draft Babangida in some sort of role following annulment, but according to rumors, this effort failed after money had already changed hands. On August 2, 1993, the Chief of Army Staff, Lieutenant General Sani Ibrahim, told senior officers of the army in Lagos that difficulties in arranging a new presidential election before August 27, 1993 had persuaded the government with the backing of the two parties and foreign countries to form an interim national government (ING). The ING would organize elections and carry out government responsibilities. Officers discussed options for a full civilian government composed of the two parties, a mixed civilian-military interim regime, or a full temporary military regime. Those present recommended that Babangida should stay no longer than August 27, 1993, and that officers from all three services should work out the details for transition. Such officers should not have held political positions in the government. They also recommended that the National Assembly be on recess while the ING was active and that the two political parties be self-financing. The interesting thing about this process of military consultation on the transitional program was that it was parallel to the tripartite committee mentioned earlier. On August 3, 1993, faced with real and imagined threats to his life and with no hope of getting Babangida to rescind his decision on the June 12 matter, Chief Moshood Abiola left Nigeria for Europe. On August 17, General Babangida informed the National Assembly that he was stepping aside. His service chiefs did not accompany him to the National Assembly, which was a breach of protocol and an indicator that he was fast losing control of the military. On that same day, which happened to be his birthday, senior officers from all three services met in Lagos and reaffirmed that Babangida could not continue in office. They did not, however, appoint a successor to replace him, nor did they make room for him to play the role of a commander-in-chief during an interim government. This oversight, which Babangida was not pleased about, was very convenient for Abacha's game plan. On the strength of recommendation of the tripartite committee, the government then established the Nwambweze panel. It was tasked to draft a constitution for the proposed interim national government. The panel was headed by Professor Ben Nwambweze. In those dangerous days, officers who used to be freely admitted into Babangida's courtyard with their security details were now required to be disarmed and to leave their details as far away as possible. There was at least one such incident involving General Abacha himself. On August 25, 1993, with options for a safe exit closing fast, General Babangida settled on Chief Enerst Shonekan as his candidate for the chairmanship of the proposed interim national government. Shonekan, incidentally, was not only Yoruba like Abiola, but also from Abeokuta in Ogun State like Abiola. Lieutenant General Aliyu Gusau, then the National Security Advisor, reportedly influenced his appointment, and the British government supported it. The Nigerian military as an institution had nothing to do with his appointment. Shonekan reportedly agreed as a condition of his appointment not to reopen the June 12 matter. He also allegedly made a commitment to assist in preventing Yorubas from forming a united front on the issue. Another curious agreement was that Shonekan would not move into the official presidential villa in Abuja, but would instead stay at the presidential guest house. The main villa was to be left vacant. Another interesting decision General Babangida made in his confused state of mind was to leave General Abacha behind as the Secretary of Defense and Vice Chairman of the Interim National Government, reportedly as an insurance against coup and to ensure unity of the military in backing the Interim National Government. In other words, genuinely concerned about the safety of the hen house, Babangida asked the fox to guard it. To counterbalance Abacha, however, Babangida planned to appoint Lieutenant General Joshua Dongoyaro as the Chief of Defense Staff. Abacha would guide policy, while Dongoyaro would take charge of operations. This curious arrangement was actually a default for which Babangida had no serious options, except perhaps Brigadier David Mark. Once he lost the backing of the armed forces to continue in either a military or political role after August 27, he had to rely on an unstable alliance of those he had relied all along to keep power. On August 26, 1993, a retirement parade was held at Eagle Square in Abuja for General Babangida. Following the parade, Babangida, displeased at their lack of backing for his continuation in office as the CNC, announced, along with his, the retirement of all his service chiefs with effect from August 27, 1993, and announced the appointment of Lieutenant General Dongoyaro as Chief of Defense Staff. The service chiefs retired were Lieutenant General Sali Ibrahim, Chief of Army Staff, Air Vice Marshal Dada, Chief of Air Staff, Vice Admiral Preston Omashola, Chief of Naval Staff, Vice Admiral Murtala Onyako, Deputy Chief of Defense Staff, and Alhaji Aliyu Atta, the Inspector General of Police. Following this announcement by Babangida, the Director of Military Intelligence, Brigadier General MC Ali, met with General Abacha in his bedroom and advised that the retirement made by Babangida be rescinded to help stabilize the tense situation between the armed forces and Babangida on one hand and the Nigerian public on the other. Abacha listened calmly, counseled patience, and advised that there was the need to consolidate military authority before further action. What Abacha did next was a classic move. General Sani Abacha met with the retired service chiefs, empathized with the way they were treated, and offered to extend the effective date of their retirement until September 17th. Then, the next day, with their support, he backdated the date of Babangida's retirement from the army to August 26, a step which rendered Babangida's pronouncement from the 27th invalid. Then, he later rescinded Dongoyaro's appointment as Chief of Defense Staff, arguing that three Northerners should not unfairly monopolize top jobs in defense. The three Northerners were Abacha himself as the Secretary of Defense, Dongoyaro as Chief of Defense Staff, and Gusau as Chief of Army Staff. Abacha then offered the position of Chief of Defense Staff to Lieutenant General Oladipo Diya, Commandant of the National War College and a Yoruba from Abiola's home state of Ogun. This was a cynical move by Abacha, who had little regard for Diya personally and most Yoruba officers in general. But Abacha needed to isolate Dongoyaro and had larger designs on the political class, particularly Yoruba leaders of thought who he was going to use Diya to pacify. Therefore, the Yoruba strategy was useful. For now. The Lagos group had begun preparing actively for the overthrow of the Shonekan government right from the moment it was sworn in. Nominations were accepted and votes counted at meetings of the entire caucus or an inner caucus within the outer caucus. In this manner, General Sani Abacha was elected by a self-appointed military electoral college to take over as head of state, Commander-in-Chief and Minister of Defense. Lieutenant General Diya was voted to be his Chief of General Staff, beating Lieutenant General Aliyu Gusau. Major General Abdulsalami Abubakar beat Major Generals Edward Unima and Cyril Iweze for the position of Chief of Defense Staff. Then Brigadier, later Major General MC Ali, was told that the scenario had been set for the position of Chief of Army Staff to fall on him. This implied that Lieutenant General Aliyu Gusau, who had been appointed to that position by outgoing head of state Ibrahim Babangida, was to be prospectively frozen out of any top military position in the planned Abacha dispensation. Similarly, Rear Admiral Suleiman Saidu was later edged out as Chief of Naval Staff in favor of Rear Admiral Alison Madueke in a high-stakes game of ethnic balancing championed by Brigadiers MC Ali and Aboki Abdullahi. General Gusau expressed the opinion that a full military regime at that stage would be unwise and might destroy the military. General Abubakar questioned the rush into removing Chief Shonekan, who had only just been installed. On September 24, a few days after Abacha had fully consolidated military control, Chief Moshood Abiola returned to Nigeria from Britain. A large crowd of supporters received him at the presidential wing. From the airport, his first stop, even before he went home, was Defense House in Lagos, where he met secretly with General Abacha behind closed doors. Knowledgeable insiders say that both Abacha and Diya encouraged Abiola to return home against Shonekan's wishes. Shonekan, meanwhile, on the advice of a local kitchen cabinet of close associates, was beginning to behave like a head of state and attend foreign meetings. For example, he addressed the United Nations General Assembly on October 7th, even as he was being sued at home for releasing money to the NEC for the purpose of conducting fresh elections and for setting up a panel of inquiry into the annulment of the elections. Even Fela Kuti publicly described the Shonekan government as neo-colonialist and as a Western stooge. During this period, Shonekan asked security agencies to investigate corruption in Nigerian parastatals like the NNPC, NEPA, Nigeria Airways, Central Bank, Customs, and many others. Shonekan attended the Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting from October 21 to 25, 1993 at Limassol, southwest of Nicosia, on the south coast of Cyprus. At the meeting, Shonekan was embarrassed by an appeal from Sir Douglas Richard Hurd, the British Foreign Secretary, to reach an accommodation with Moshood Abiola, the unofficial winner of the poll. From Limassol, he was reported to be making calls incessantly to Abacha in Nigeria regarding the security situation. The former USA chief executive may have been unnerved by the back-channel reports of Colonel Umar's arrest and perhaps even alleged whispers from Lieutenant General Gusau about other conspiracies lurking in the shadows. However, Abacha, in a move reminiscent of how he treated General Buhari in 1985, apparently refused to take most of the calls, citing Shonekan's lack of authority over him as the Secretary of Defense. Interestingly, Shonekan announced on October 21 that it planned to scrap the National Guard, a decision that was popular with the mainstream military and was already recommended by the secret Brigadier MC Ali Military Caucus reports. Then, on the last day of the conference, 4 members of the Movement for the Advancement of Democracy MAD, led by Jerry Yusuf, hijacked a Nigeria Airways bus A310 with 137 passengers and 11 crew bound from Lagos to Abuja. The plane ended up in the Niger Republic, where it was later stormed by Nigerian paramilitary commandos. It was Nigeria's second aircraft hijacking incident, the first having taken place back in April 1967 during tensions leading to the Nigerian Civil War. At that time, a Nigeria Airways Fokker Friendship F-27 bound for Lagos was hijacked from Benin to Enugu by Sami Yang and Onuora Nwaya of the Special Task Force, the militant wing of what later became the Biafran Directorate of Military Intelligence. Fortunately, for most of the hostages, the rescue operation was carried out professionally by the Nigerians and went well. On October 31, word leaked in the Nigerian press about efforts by some influential Nigerians to get the interim national government to dissolve both political parties and all existing political structures. Coincidentally, such a recommendation was indeed part of the MC Ali secret report. This was followed soon after by dramatic events at the National Assembly, following which the Senate President Dr. Iyosha Ayu was impeached on November 2 by pro-ING senators led by Chuba Okadigbo. Senator Ame Ebute then became the new Senate President. All of this came against background plans by the new Electoral Commission led by Professor Okon Uya to organize party primaries from January 7 to 9, 1994, followed by presidential elections on February 19, 1994. On November 6, Northern elders led by former President Shehu Shagari met to find ways to ensure that Nigeria remained united. They expressed reports for the interim national government as the midwife for a stable transition. Under these circumstances, Chief Shonekan, taunted by some for lack of power, symbolically moved into the presidential villa from the presidential guest house in early November, against his original understanding with former head of state Ibrahim Babangida and to the consternation of Sani Abacha. General Abacha was increasingly worried about Shonekan's growing confidence and irritated by security reports to Shonekan that he was planning something. Under pressure from declining international oil prices, Shonekan's government chose at that inauspicious time to withdraw the petroleum subsidy on November 8 and raise the price of petrol from 70 kobo to 3 naira 50 kobo, a massive increase with predictably dramatic effects on inflation. Not surprisingly, this action led to street protests and plans for a full-scale resumption of industrial action by pressure groups. 2 days later, on November 10, 1993, the Shonekan-led interim national government was declared illegal in a ruling at the Lagos High Court presided over by Justice Dolapo Akinsanya. Back in October, as previously noted, a case had been brought by Moshood Abiola and Babagana Kingibe to declare the interim national government illegal, null, and void. The lead attorney for the Federal Ministry of Justice, Mr. Dele Jegede, advised the court that Decree No. 61, which was supposedly the legal basis of the interim national government, did not exist. Decree No. 56 had previously fixed August 27, 1993 as the date of commencement of the 1989 Constitution. Justice Akinsanya reasoned that since Babangida had divested himself of power by signing Decree No. 59 of August 26, he had no power to sign Decree No. 61. All of this dovetailed nicely into General Abacha's original skillful backdating of the effective date of Babangida's retirement to August 26th. The day after the court judgment, Professor Bolaji Akinyemi publicly pleaded with General Sani Abacha to rescue Nigeria from a terrible political and legal quagmire. But Abacha, ever so patient and disciplined regarding the timing of coup, resisted being rushed before crossing his T's and dotting his I's. After all, Shonekan's government was contesting the Akinsanya judgment in a higher court, and Abacha still had to watch his flanks within the military carefully. There was still the matter of how to handle the Chief of Army Staff, Lieutenant General Aliyu Gusau, who was not a man to be underrated. On November 17, 1993, at about 10 a.m., Generals Sani Abacha, Oladipo Diya, and Aliyu Gusau arrived at the presidential villa in Abuja, accompanied by truckloads of fearsome-looking soldiers. These troops were under the command of 2 Lagos group conspirators, namely Colonel Lawan Gwadabe of the National Guard and Brigadier Bashir Magashi of the Brigade of Guards. Magashi was almost certainly there to make sure Gwadabe followed the Abacha script and no other. Following a private meeting with Chief Enerst Shonekan, Abacha graciously allowed Shonekan to deliver a farewell speech to the interim national government after 82 days of controversy, following which he was flown to Lagos. After waiting patiently for so many years, Abacha had finally struck. The Kanuri General then dissolved the legislature as well as the state and local governments and replaced the elected civilian state governors with military and police officers.
Consequently, the following decisions come into immediate effect. The interim national government is hereby dissolved. The national and state assemblies are also dissolved. The state executive councils are dissolved. The brigade commanders are to take over from the governors in their states until administrators are appointed. Where there are no brigade commanders, the commissioners of police in the states are to take over. All local governments stand dissolved. The directors of personnel are to take over the administration of the local governments until administrators are appointed. The National Electoral Commission is hereby dissolved. All former secretaries to federal ministries are to hand over to their director generals until ministers are appointed. The two political parties are hereby dissolved. All processions, political meetings and associations of any type in any part of the country are hereby banned. Any consultative committee, by whatever name called, is hereby proscribed.
However, in October 1995, Abacha set a time frame of 3 years to hand over power to an elected civilian government, but he died on Monday, June 8, 1998, under mysterious circumstances. More on that story in our next video.